Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 161. At this moment, Ulquiorra's cold and emotionless voice rang out amid the scattered rubble and dust. Is this all your strength? It is indeed much stronger than I expected. Even with both hands, I couldn't completely block it. But it is still too weak. Under Ichigo Kurosaki's astonished gaze, Ulquiorra walked out from the rubble and dust. Except for his slightly dirty clothes, he still looked safe and sound. Ichigo's heart sank. How could this Espada not be injured when facing the Getsuga Tensho head-on? What level of Espada was this guy? Could he be the leader of the Espada? The time for hollowification was running out. What should he do now? Just as Ichigo hesitated, Ulquiorra extended his finger and shot out an emerald-colored Siro. Ichigo was unable to react and was submerged by the terrifying blast. The emerald-green Siro continued to move forward like a huge wave, easily penetrating the thick walls of the Kainyaku Palace and hitting the desert outside, causing thunderous explosions. Next to the collapsed wall, Ichigo was panting violently. His Ryatsu fluctuated, and his Shihakusho was damaged. The strange voice in his heart became more and more anxious and irritable. You can't win, you're too weak, let me do it. Let me kill him, kill them all. Kill, kill, kill. The moment you were hit by the Siro, you put on that strange mask again, Ulquiorra observed, looking at Ichigo who was in terrible shape. Your reaction was timely, which saved your life. But the mask only lasted for a moment, which means you can't continue to use this ability. It seems that this is your limit. You haven't evolved to the level we expected, which is a pity. At this time, Ulquiorra once again confirmed his previous judgment. The Shinigami are truly inadequate. Even if they have similar powers to Hollows, they are just poor imitations. The 10 Espadas and Lord Aizen are destined to be the winners of this war, without any doubt. After being hit by the Siro, Ichigo was no longer able to fight. His hollow time had run out, and he couldn't activate it again for the time being. However, he did not give up, and said firmly, You must be the leader of the 10 Espada, right? As long as I beat you, I will have defeated the strongest Espada. It's not impossible. Ulquiorra lifted up his messy white shirt, revealing his slightly exaggerated pectoral muscles and the black number 4. 4? Such a strong Arrancar is only number 4? This is impossible. Ichigo's pupils shrank, his face full of disbelief. His world was shaking, and his confidence was about to collapse. At this moment, Ichigo felt despair washing over him. He had trained with his hollow powers for so long and thought that he could match the Espada, but he was thoroughly beaten without his opponent even drawing a sword. Wasn't he just a clown? And Ulquiorra, who was so powerful, wasn't even among the top 3 Espadas, but merely ranked 4th. Was Ichigo really that weak? It seems you understand now. Ulquiorra's face remained expressionless. As you can see, I am only the 4th Espada. Even if you could defeat me, there are still 3 Espadas stronger than I am. Therefore, all your struggles are in vain. You are doomed to fail. After saying this, he stretched out his right hand, and his arm pierced through Ichigo's chest like a sharp blade. You! Ichigo fell to the ground helplessly. His Ryatsu began to decline, and Zangetsu also reverted from its Bankai state. He was defeated, completely defeated. Ulquiorra did not choose to finish off his opponent but turned to leave, offering a final piece of advice. If you can still move, leave Hueco Mundo. That way, you might survive. If you can't move, then die here. Either way, this is the end of your life as a Shinigami. He had defeated his opponent's spirit, and even if Ichigo survived, he would no longer pose a threat. Even so, Ulquiorra still found Ichigo to be a strange person. He possessed powers similar to theirs, but he was naive and extremely weak. Such a contradictory existence was truly unexpected. That's why Ulquiorra had said those extra words. At this moment, Ichigo no longer had the strength to speak. His consciousness began to blur. Compared to the high-spirited young man who had broken into Soul Society, he was now completely different. When had he become like this? As his willpower weakened, he wavered. He was hesitating whether to fully use that monster's power. The enemy was too strong, and 5 seconds of hollowification was too short. If he could let the monster in his heart kill wantonly, he would definitely win, right? What a pity that even now, he couldn't figure out the deeper meaning behind Captain Commander Uehara's words. Such a powerful person would definitely not lie to him. If he could understand the deeper meaning of those words, perhaps he wouldn't have failed. Compared to the conflicted Ichigo, Uehara Shiroa was relaxed and content. Especially after he finished watching the crescent moon in the sky and received the system prompt, he felt even better. Complete the daily task watching the moon in Hueco Mundo. You are rewarded with Shadow Clone +1 and Shuumpa +1. The Shadow Clone technique surpasses the perfect level and evolves into the S-level ability, Multiple Shadow Clone Technique. Looking at these two prompts, Uehara Shiroa's lips curved into a slight smile. Some people go out to face the boss, and some protagonists can only lie down and get beaten, but he could become stronger and invincible just by lying down. The opportunities between people were really different. After sighing, he opened his character panel and took a look. Name, Uehara Shiroa. Position, Captain Commander of the T-Gun, Guardian of the Noble Street, 3rd seat of the 1st Division. Ryatsu, 1st Class Ryuryoku. Zanpakuto, Shunkyo, Man and Sword combined into one, 2nd Stage Bankai. Zanjutsu, 1000-year Captain Level. Hakuda, 1000-year Captain Level. Kido, Transcendent Level. Shuumpa, Transcendent Level. Abilities. Shadow Clone Technique, B-Rank Ability, Perfect. Stand White Album, S-Rank Ability, Perfect. Breathing Technique, Sun Breathing, B-Rank Ability, Perfect. Angel Power, Universal Barrier, S-Rank Ability, Perfect. Magic Moves 7 Flashes, A-Rank Ability, Perfect. Observation Haki, A-Rank Ability, Perfect. Unlimited Blade Works Making, EX Ability, Great Success. Multiple Shadow Clone Technique, S-Rank Ability, Great Success. Items. Camouflage Glasses, B-Rank Item, Kryptonian Creation. Death Gloves, A-Rank Item, Extraordinary Creation. Horse Talisman, A-Rank Item, Magical Creation. 3-Dimensional Maneuvering Device, D-Rank Item, Technological Creation. Black Ball Combat Suit, B-Rank Item, Technological Creation. Mind Gem, SR, Infinity Gem. A Ryatsu that was about to surpass 1st Class, a spacetime super-evolved Zanpakuto that combined man and sword, 2 transcendent Shinigami skills, 6 perfect level abilities, a bunch of treasures. It was very safe, very comfortable, and very invincible. He had achieved what he had today because of his perseverance in fishing, drinking, painting, and having fun. Every day, in addition to eating, drinking, and enjoying himself, he spent time with the different girls in the world of Shinigami. Such a simple and unpretentious life was really hard. There was an additional multiple shadow clone technique on the panel, which was an S-level ability, and the initial proficiency was at the great perfection level. Uehara Shiroa condensed his Ryatsu, put his hands together, and performed the multiple shadow clone technique. In an instant, a large number of shadow clones appeared in the world of Hueco Mundo. If he released his Ryatsu to create shadow clones, he could completely replicate Naruto's mass shadow clone tactics, and it wasn't difficult to create hundreds or thousands of shadow clones. However, the consumption was too high, and the cost-performance ratio wasn't worth it. After some experiments, Uehara Shiroa came to several conclusions. First, although the shadow clone technique showed as a perfect B-level ability on his panel, in reality, like his Zanpakuto, it had exceeded the limit of its own level. This ability had basically reached the extreme of its potential, just as Shunkyo had exceeded the limit of a normal Zanpakuto. If you used one word to describe it, it would be superb. This was an ability beyond the perfect level, and it was difficult to quantify. Because he had touched the source power of this ability, this was mastery at the rule level. Rules were difficult to quantify, but the power was undoubtedly strong. Whether it was Uchiha 1 vs 7, the Shadow Clone Jinchuriki, or even the creator of the Shadow Clone, Senju Tobarama, none could surpass him in the mastery of the Shadow Clone technique. The panel showed perfect only because the level cap was perfect, which wasn't his upper limit. Because of this, the S-level multiple Shadow Clone technique had a great success level of proficiency from the beginning. Uehara Shiroha had a feeling that with a little practice, he could raise his proficiency in the multiple Shadow Clone technique to an even higher level. The power represented a huge improvement in strength. He could use Shadow Clones very easily, just like eating and drinking. And Shadow Clones at this level could even break through the limitations of normal abilities. For example, his Shadow Clones were no longer fragile and wouldn't disperse at the slightest touch. Additionally, every system ability that reached the perfect level actually had hidden characteristics. For example, the physical strengthening of the stand, the restraint of evil creatures by the sun breathing, and the characteristic of the Shadow Clone was a learning ability that could be called a bug. The Shadow Clones that surpassed the perfect level had learning and practice abilities at the highest level. With their help, Uehara Shiroha could quickly improve the proficiency of high-level abilities. Even transcendent level abilities were no exception. Although the panel showed that he had mastered 2 transcendent level abilities, with his current Ryatsu, it was actually difficult to exert the strongest power of these 2 abilities. The progress of practicing the 5 elements barrier and the Tenjin Shuunpa was extremely slow. This was similar to his experience with the Unlimited Blade Works technique of EX rank. After this ability reached the Great Perfection level, even with a large number of Shadow Clones assisting in practice, the proficiency was almost unchanged. This was because high-level abilities were inherently difficult to improve, and the higher the proficiency level, the more difficult further improvement became. EX abilities were the most difficult to improve. However, with the multiple Shadow Clone technique and Shadow Clones of the superb level, this problem wasn't solved entirely, but the difficulty was greatly reduced. The bug-level learning ability of the group Shadow Clone allowed him to quickly master high-level abilities and use them freely, with the potential to increase their power. For high-level abilities, every point of proficiency improvement represented a leap in strength. For abilities at the Transcendence level, in the current version, they were basically an instant kill. As long as the proficiency of EX abilities was sufficient, it could even threaten beings at the level of Soul King candidate. This level of ability was originally the ceiling of the Shinigami world, an existence that could be on the same level as a creator god. However, even if the proficiency of his abilities was sufficient, Uehara Shiroha still needed to consider factors such as combat experience. With the multiple Shadow Clone technique, he had confidence to perfect even EX abilities as soon as possible. But when it came to actual combat, he still needed to perform the techniques himself. Performance in actual combat was also a key factor in determining victory or defeat. The task rewards in Shadow Clone practice only gave him a powerful character sheet and abilities. This was equivalent to inheriting a maxed-out account in a game. However, just like in games, characters with the same stats would definitely show different strengths in the hands of different players. Raw power couldn't be completely converted into instant combat effectiveness. It was just like using the same hero for a solo match. When the raw power was equal, some players could still crush others. Basic martial arts might be the most superficial technique in the hands of others, but in the hands of a master, it could be as invincible and powerful as a divine skill. This was because of differences in mentality, awareness, and combat talent. Uehara Shiroha kept this point in mind. So even if his raw power gave him an advantage, he wouldn't waste it or become careless. In this world, there were too many old foxes and cheaters. So, he didn't play for a mere advantage, but only for a crushing victory. When his Unlimited Blade Works of EX rank reached perfection, it would be time for him to truly exert his strength. When that time came, with power at the level of the Spirit King, all the cheaters and powerful opponents would be crushed. At this stage, although he was relatively invincible, he still couldn't be reckless. Instead, he could selectively show his prowess in front of certain people. After all, with the current strength of the bosses, it would be difficult for Uehara Shiroha to turn the tables completely. As the saying goes, hiding one's shortcomings wasn't hiding one's stupidity, pretending to be a pig wasn't being a real pig, and being cautious didn't mean being afraid. He chose to act cautiously just to enjoy life better and to be foolproof, not because he was really afraid of anyone. In the desert, Uehara Shiroha began to familiarize himself with the multiple shadow clone technique he had just acquired. He needed to determine the optimal number of shadow clones to achieve the best practice effect. Next to him, Nell was snoring with a silly smile on her face. In Las Noches Palace, Grimmjow had already taken action. Although he had been taught a terrible lesson by Aizen, there was no word for fear in his dictionary. Ichigo Kurosaki had come to Hueco Mundo. If Grimmjow avoided fighting, it would mean he was afraid of Ichigo. In any case, he refused to bow to any Shinigami. It might be because he sensed a similar spirit from Ichigo. Therefore, after noticing that Ichigo's Ryatsu had become weak, Grimmjow couldn't sit still. This guy couldn't be allowed to die like this. In that case, Grimmjow would never be able to take revenge, and he would never be able to prove himself. So, Grimmjow went to Orihime Inoue's room and rescued her from being humiliated and tortured by Loli and Minoli. Originally, Ulquiorra was responsible for protecting Orihime, but he had gone to confront her friend, so he had no time to protect her. Orihime, an outsider human, was appreciated by Aizen. As Aizen's subordinates, Loli and Minoli certainly wouldn't let this slide. Especially when the two of them were competing for Aizen's favor and had been reprimanded by him, that was intolerable. They didn't care about consequences or protocol. Chapter 162. However, Grimmjow would not tolerate these two Arrancar women. He delivered two powerful kicks, knocking them down neatly. Loli, who had been the most ruthless attacker, was injured the worst. She was breathing out more than breathing in. Orihime was dumbfounded. Was this blue-haired Arrancar really so brave? He even dared to hit Aizen's favorites. Did he want to lose his position? Looking at the surprised Orihime, Grimmjow said impatiently. "Woman, this is to repay you for healing my arm. But I've already paid you back, and you'll serve me from now on." However, Orihime's next move surprised him a little. She actually returned the favor and used her ability to heal the seriously injured Loli and Minoli. Grimmjow could only sigh that Ichigo and Orihime were indeed a pair, both foolishly merciful in their own way. Of course, this wasn't important at all. What mattered was his battle with Ichigo Kurosaki. So, he took Orihime to find the seriously injured Ichigo. After hearing the information provided by Loli and Minoli, Ulquiorra's expression finally changed. Grimmjow rescued Orihime? What was he thinking? How dare he? Both of them were troublesome. What was the point of all this chaos? In a ruined section of Las Noches, Orihime was treating Ichigo. However, this time, her healing did not go smoothly. A very strong Ryatsu lingered over the wound below Ichigo's neck. Because of this obstruction, her Soten Kisun couldn't immediately reject the round wound the size of a teacup. She could only treat it slowly. Looking at the unconscious Ichigo, Orihime, with tears in her eyes, couldn't help but wonder. What terrifying Ryatsu! Who did this to him? Looking at the familiar wound that resembled a hollow hole, Grimmjow sneered and said, "It's Ulquiorra. I don't know if that guy has noticed that he always inflicts the same wound on his prized prey. This wound is exactly the same as the hollow hole on his body, like a hunter's mark. Humph. I'll definitely teach him a profound lesson. I want him to understand what happens when he snatches someone else's prey." Ichigo Kurosaki was the prey Grimmjow had set his sights on. For this prey, he had been beaten several times and was punished by Aizen twice. After paying such a huge price, it was impossible for him to give up. You know, cats are very persistent about their prey. He was determined to take Ichigo's head. He wanted to defeat Ichigo at his strongest, while wearing that weird hollow mask, and achieve a complete victory. "Grimmjow, it's you?" Ichigo woke up and looked at Grimmjow and Orihime in shock. He was confused about what had happened.
Why would Grimjow, who was an enemy, help him and bring Oraheim?
Grimjow said excitedly.
You should be quiet and heal your wounds. Only then can I kill you. Oraheim finally understood Grimjow's intention.
She hastily raised an objection.
So this is why you asked me to heal Kurosaki-kun? Grimjow retorted. What do you have to complain about? I asked you to heal your friend and saved his life, you should be grateful to me. At this moment, after a sound of sonito, Ulquiorra appeared before the three. Upon seeing the newcomer, Ichigo and Oraheim were shocked.
Grimjow felt a chill run down his spine, and hurriedly turned around, then said coldly, Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra, with his partial hollow mask, looked at Grimjow and said indifferently.
What are you doing, Grimjow? Why did you take Oraheim, who was under my supervision? Why did you heal the enemy I defeated?
If other Arrancars encountered such a situation, they would have been furious. But Ulquiorra, as the epitome of cold detachment, remained calm and composed. Of course, this was also because he had absolute confidence that he could handle all three people before him.
If he could defeat that Shinigami once, he could defeat him twice.
Grimjow was just the Sexta Espada, and posed no threat at all.
However, Grimjow didn't see it that way. Facing Ulquiorra's questioning, he decisively launched an attack. Don't even think about taking this woman back, let alone Kurosaki Ichigo. To be honest, I've wanted to beat you for a long time. By the way, you've never dared to fight me head-on, is it because you're afraid of me, afraid of a fight to the death?
Faced with his unreasonable colleague, Ulquiorra simply raised his right arm in defense.
His calm demeanor somewhat resembled Aizen's style.
It was a pity that he lacked Aizen's perceptiveness and didn't immediately see through Grimjow's intentions.
The initial attack was blocked, and Grimjow made a desperate gesture to continue his offensive, catching Ulquiorra off guard. Reluctantly, Ulquiorra had to fight back, but he didn't use his full strength.
Taking advantage of this opportunity, Grimjow threw a hidden Kaja negation into the hollow hole below Ulquiorra's neck, sealing him in a different dimension.
Despicable. Before being sealed, Ulquiorra finally showed a hint of irritation and cursed under his breath.
This was truly a case of a scholar cannot defend himself against a soldier. He had been dealing with the situation calmly and hadn't killed anyone, yet in the end, he was outmaneuvered.
He also didn't understand why Grimjow had gone to such lengths. What a madman! After accomplishing this, Grimjow looked at Oraheim and said, This is a Kaja negation made by Aizen, a tool used to permanently seal lesser Arrancar. But it's a bit difficult to contain an Espada. With that guy's Ryatsu, he can only be sealed for 2 or 3 hours at most. So quickly heal Ichigo for me.
At this point, Oraheim had stopped treating Ichigo and refused Grimjow's request. She wasn't stupid, and could clearly see that Grimjow was itching for a fight.
This meant Ichigo would be beaten again after being healed. She couldn't allow that. She didn't want Ichigo to be injured again.
Grimjow was furious and reached out to force Oraheim to continue the treatment.
Ichigo, who had regained consciousness but whose injuries hadn't fully healed, stopped Grimjow and said to Oraheim, Heal me. Don't worry. I will win. And heal him too. After the brief skirmish with Ulquiorra, one of Grimjow's arms was blackened and seriously injured. Ichigo didn't want to take advantage of this. Like Grimjow, he also wanted a fair fight.
Oraheim had no choice but to heal both of them. A fierce battle was inevitable.
Bankai, Tensa Zangetsu.
Ichigo, his body now recovered, clenched Zangetsu and activated his Bankai while entering his hollow state. He stretched out his right hand and wiped it across his face. The fox-like mask with red and black stripes and ferocious teeth appeared again, covering his entire face. At this moment, Ichigo, wearing his black Shihakusho, resembled a fierce ghost warrior. A powerful Ryatsu burst out from him, chaotic and heavy, spreading outward like 1,000 galloping horses with magnificent momentum. His sword was now a slender, pitch-black blade. His Ryatsu was a magnificent and heavy mixture, and he himself was a substitute Shinigami who embodied the power of 4 different sources. Noticing the change in Ichigo's Ryatsu, Oraheim shrank back as bad memories surfaced in her mind.
She recalled that nightmare-like night when her brother, Sora Inoue, attacked her and Tatsuki. Her once gentle brother had turned into a monster, completely irrational. She would never forget her brother who became a hollow. She feared that tragedy might repeat itself. In particular, she sensed a Ryatsu from Ichigo similar to that of her brother. In an instant, fear surged into her heart, and her mind went blank. Sorry, Inoue. Ichigo keenly sensed the fear in Oraheim's heart, and he felt a little depressed. He thought that his current appearance was scaring her. If possible, he wouldn't want to fight in this form, and he didn't want to frighten his friends. But he had no choice. The words of Captain Commander Uehara kept echoing in his heart. Ichigo looked up at the excited Grimmjow with a firm gaze and rising fighting spirit. This time, he would not run away, not from his true self or from this uncontrollable power. Yes, that's it, very good. Grimmjow said enthusiastically. Now you've finally begun to accept your true nature. Then your mask can last longer, right? If it breaks as quickly as before, this fight will be meaningless. After saying that, facing the hollowified Bankai Ichigo, he chose to release his Zanpakuto without hesitation. Grind, Pantera. A heavy and majestic Ryatsu rushed skyward, kicking up thousands of grains of white sand and forming rolling waves of dust. The resurrection of an Espada was equivalent to the Bankai of a Shinigami, perhaps even stronger. The power and intensity of the Ryatsu were both incredible. This time, Grimmjow wasn't going to hold back. Ichigo in this state was qualified to witness his strongest form. After realizing that Grimmjow was prepared to attack with all his strength, Ichigo turned to Oraheim and said, Inoue, step back and deploy your Santen Keshin. No matter what happens, do not leave the barrier. Oraheim obediently retreated and deployed her defensive barrier. Grimmjow, who had completed his resurrection, regained his true hollow essence. He was one step closer to his true self, his bestial form. His Ryatsu was greatly enhanced, and his appearance transformed completely. His whole body was covered with white bone-like armor, sharp claws grew from his hands, and fangs protruded from his mouth. Compared to his humanoid form, Grimmjow's bestial features were now more prominent, making him look more like the predator he truly was, and his strength had soared. In the blink of an eye, the Resurrection Grimmjow and Bankai hollowified Ichigo clashed. The two fought like wild beasts, battling across the sky and earth. Their terrifying Ryatsu covered the sky like dark clouds, and the ground shook beneath them. The intensity of this battle had surpassed that of an ordinary captain-level Shinigami's Bankai. In the desert, Uehara Shiroa was leisurely teasing Nell while using his observation haki to monitor Ichigo's situation. In fact, he had already noticed the fight between Ulquiorra and Ichigo before this. The battle between the two had been quite exciting. He just viewed it as entertaining follow-up content. Ichigo's strength provided valuable reference points. Ulquiorra's Ryatsu control and Segunda Etapa were both impressive. Perhaps because he was born as a Vasto Lord, Ulquiorra was closer to the origin of hollows than other Arrancar. The Espada embodied the concept of nihilism and basically didn't do anything unnecessary. Usually, he didn't even display unnecessary expressions. Even in battle, Ulquiorra adhered to this concept. Therefore, his attacks were very precise, and he would defend and counterattack with just the right amount of force. He had blocked the attacks of both Ichigo and Grimmjow with just one hand several times. It wasn't arrogance or pretentiousness, it was simply his nature. He felt there was no need to use excessive strength. Because of this, Ulquiorra was somewhat unprepared when facing Ichigo's unexpected potential. However, he was strong enough to handle it, so he didn't fall. It was different when facing Grimmjow. Ulquiorra hadn't expected that the seemingly arrogant and brainless Sexta Espada would actually play dirty. It was precisely because the Cuarta Espada only used enough power to suppress Grimmjow that he was tricked. But then again, even if he had used all his strength, Ulquiorra's expression wouldn't have changed much, and his emotions would barely have stirred. Therefore, he appeared very intimidating, almost like a machine, and seemed particularly at ease. Uehara Shiroha knew this was just because Ulquiorra embodied nothingness. If unnecessary, he would never use extra expression or strength. Other Arrancar displayed various human traits, often forgetting the meaning of their titles.
Only Ulquiorra still adhered to his hollow nature, like a samurai who refused to abandon his code of honor. But unfortunately, after interacting with Ichigo and Orihime, even Ulquiorra had begun to rebel against his nature. In truth, Ichigo's potential had broken Ulquiorra's judgment several times and shaken his principles.
That's why the Espada now regarded Ichigo as prey. But in Uehara Shiroha's eyes, this was completely unnecessary. Hollows were hollows. Why did they need so much humanity? Just fancy and useless things.
Thinking of this, he glanced at Nell, who was chasing a lizard, and thought to himself.
However, this one could be a little more human. The more, the better, the bigger, the better.
At the same time, with the perception of his observation haki, for female Arrancar in the distance also came into view. Above the dome of Las Noches, the Tres Espada, Harabel, was watching the place where Grimmjow and Ichigo were fighting, accompanied by her three subordinates. As the only female among the Espada, Tyr Harabel not only had a beautiful face and curvaceous figure, but also possessed excellent combat skills and wisdom. She had dark skin, green eyes, a voluptuous upper body, and long blonde hair tied into 3 braids. Although her appearance was striking, she was cautious and careful, contradicting expectations based on her looks, and she was usually taciturn. The 3 female fraction around her were quite lively. Feeling the strong Ryatsu fluctuations coming from afar, the passionate subordinate Mila Rose exclaimed. This kind of Ryatsu is distorting space itself. It's really too much. Mila, with long black curly hair, was tall and strong, with very defined facial features, a straight nose, and deep-set eyes. Whether in figure, personality, or dress, Mila resembled an Amazonian warrior. Another subordinate, Apache, with a more ordinary appearance, mocked. Are you afraid? But fighting like this under the dome is really excessive. Chapter 163. The destructive power of the Espada was too strong, so Aizen strictly forbade them from fighting near the dome of Las Noches to prevent large-scale damage to the palace. It was precisely because they had detected Ryatsu fluctuations beyond the norm that they appeared here to gather intelligence. Of course, another reason was the rumor that the powerful Uehara Shiroha had also come to Hueco Mundo. The fraction with dark green bangs and long hair covered her mouth and smiled. Stop arguing. I can see you're both scared. Sung-sun, like Mila Rose and Apache, was a subordinate of Harabel. The 3 female Arrancar had followed Harabel, who was a Vasto Lord, since their days as Ajuchas. The 4 of them were like sisters and had a deep bond with each other. Harabel, who wore her collar high to cover her lips, did not stop her 3 subordinates from bickering. This was their way of communicating, noisy but reassuring. She didn't ask for much, she just wanted to protect the 3 of them, and it would be even better if she could create a peaceful world. This was why she was willing to swear allegiance to Aizen. She believed that Aizen, who possessed the Hogyoku, could create a better world. There was no way she couldn't believe it, because he had given them too much. Without Aizen, Sung-sun and the others would not have been able to become Arrancar and would have been in danger of regression. He had offered them a bargaining chip they couldn't refuse. No hollow could resist the temptation to evolve, nor could they reject Aizen's invitation. This Ryatsu feels like a Shinigami's. Could it be that Uehara Shiroha? Mila Rose asked with confusion. The reason they came here was to be on alert for intruders. When they had set out, Harabel had warned them that if they encountered the Shinigami named Uehara Shiroha, they should retreat immediately and never linger. It shouldn't be him, but there are warriors who have released their resurrection and are fighting, Harabel reminded them. So, you're right to feel scared. Remember this most primitive fear. Also, remember my warning, don't fight with Uehara Shiroha. At the same time, Harabel thought with concern. The Espada who released his resurrection should be Grimmjow. The one fighting Grimmjow should be the Shinigami named Ichigo Kurosaki. I didn't expect the Shinigami's Ryatsu to be so heavy and powerful. This battle feels like 2 Espada fighting. Fortunately, that Uehara Shiroha hasn't intervened. Unlike the other Espada, Harabel possessed not only a queenly figure and voice but also a queenly personality and mindset. Therefore, she had been gathering intelligence. Long ago, she had noticed Uehara Shiroha's existence and classified him as someone who must not be provoked. By chance, she had learned how terrifying his strength was. So she knew very well that if it were Uehara Shiroha fighting, Grimmjow, even in his resurrection state, would never have lasted this long. Although Grimmjow, as the Sexta Espada, had outstanding combat talent and power, even his released form was no match for Uehara Shiroha. But she couldn't understand why Aizen hadn't warned them or taken any action when such a powerful enemy invaded Hueco Mundo. This wasn't like those other human invaders, the threat was very great. Would it really not affect their plans to let such a being act freely? Thinking of the information she had previously collected about Uehara Shiroha, Harabel felt vaguely uneasy. She was the Tres Espada, a vasto lord-class Arrancar, and already a top expert in Hueco Mundo. Even so, she still had an unsettling feeling that she couldn't control her fate. Facing masters like Uehara Shiroha and Aizen, Harabel truly had no confidence. But now that things had progressed this far, the arrow was on the string and must be shot. Aizen had single-handedly changed Hueco Mundo, giving them power and hope. And he possessed absolute strength. In Hueco Mundo, the strong were respected, and they only believed in the strong. So they had no way back and could only follow Aizen all the way to the end. She just hoped that the plan would proceed smoothly, that they wouldn't lose too many comrades, and that there wouldn't be endless wars in the future. Outside the Senkamen at the 12th Division, the tall and gentle Isane Kotetsu asked Captain Unohana beside her. "Captain, why do we suddenly have to help Kurosaki? Didn't we say Inoue was a traitor before?" At this point, she felt conflicted. She had interacted with Oraheim several times and had long regarded her as a friend. The human girl had helped a lot and saved many wounded from the 4th Division. Isane felt guilty that she couldn't help her friend in need. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" Retsu Unohana, the captain of the 4th Division who embodied the perfect Japanese lady, had already seen through her Vika captain's thoughts. "Didn't you always want to rescue Oraheim, never believing she would betray us?" Unohana wasn't concerned about whether Oraheim had betrayed them. But she was impressed by the ability of that human girl. The power manifested through such weak Ryatsu surpassed her own Zanpakuto Esbankai in terms of healing. This didn't seem like an ordinary ability. Or rather, that ability had transcended common limitations. "I still hold to my opinion," Isane first hunched her shoulders, then said firmly. "Inoue is innocent. We should help her." She couldn't believe that the gentle and kind human girl would betray Soul Society and her friends. Now that she had the opportunity to go to Hueco Mundo for a rescue mission, she was eager to help. At this point, Mayuri Karatsuchi, who was tinkering with the gate, suddenly spoke up. "It doesn't matter whether the girl betrayed us or not. The key is that her ability is very special and very important." When he said this, his eyes beneath his mask flashed with light, and he thought privately, "I never imagined that a human could possess such a special ability." I sensed that the ability of that human girl was extraordinary from the start. Damn Quincy, if Yuri Ueshida hadn't interfered, I would have captured Oraheim long ago. But fortunately, the surveillance bacteria worked. Sailaporo? It seems we're the same type of scientist. I will happily make use of your research results. When Ichigo and the others had invaded Soul Society, Mayuri had discovered the extraordinary qualities of both Oraheim and Yuryu. He had tracked them down and confirmed their identities. Yuri Ueshida was of little interest, as he had already studied the Quincy thoroughly, and there was nothing surprising there. But Foolbringers were rare, and their abilities were truly special. At that time, he had been ecstatic and wanted to capture them alive. Unfortunately, he had been too careless and hadn't expected that the Quincy still had a trick up his sleeve. As a result, Mayuri had missed such a precious experimental subject. It was such a pity. Fortunately, the last time he made contact with them, he had been prepared. When he had confronted the Ryoka, Mayuri had a trick up his sleeve. He had planted surveillance bacteria on Yuri Ueshida in advance. This allowed him to see what Yuri saw and hear what he heard. In this way, he collected a wealth of information related to the Espada, especially about the Octava Espada, Sailaporo. Mayuri was not interested in saving people. Compassion was not what he pursued. But he was very interested in acquiring the research results of his peers and proving his own technological superiority.
Moreover, those Arrancar were precious experimental subjects.
It would be a terrible waste if they simply died. Isane, who didn't understand the situation, asked in confusion.
Inoue's ability? Although it is an excellent healing power, is it really worthy of such attention, Captain?
After all, her combat capability isn't strong. As a member of the 4th Division, she had faced discrimination often. The attitude within the Gotei 13 was that healing abilities weren't as important as combat prowess. Of course, she didn't share this view. But a single healing ability didn't seem sufficient to change the situation, and it couldn't explain why the captain had suddenly changed his mind.
Healing ability? Weak fighting ability?
Mayuri rebuked sharply.
How naive.
Her ability is not healing at all, but the rejection of reality itself. The girl can reject events that have already occurred and return them to a state where they never happened. This ability transcends time and space, it violates the realm of God. Mere healing is not qualified to be compared with it. In his opinion, these fools didn't understand the uniqueness and importance of this ability at all. What also irritated him was that it was Kasuke Urahara who had discovered the true nature of this ability. It was also through Urahara's insight that they had deduced Aizen's intentions.
After listening to Mayuri's explanation, Isane was still confused. After all that complicated talk, wasn't it still just a healing ability? She couldn't grasp these high-sounding concepts.
She couldn't begin to imagine the upper limits of Oraheim's power. Unohana, who had remained silent until now, frowned and suddenly spoke.
The ability to negate reality beyond time and space? Then would this ability work on the Hogyoku? And is your source of information reliable? She had previously observed that Oraheim's ability was not simple healing.
However, she hadn't expected that its essence actually involved divine power. She also had her suspicions about the source of Oraheim's abilities. If this was the case, then it was difficult to say how far this power could reach.
Perhaps even the Hogyoku couldn't resist it.
As expected of Captain Unohana, Mayuri said with grudging respect, answering truthfully.
I believe that's precisely what Aizen is aiming for.
Intelligence suggests that if we use the girl's ability, the Hogyoku may fully awaken. We should have had 4 months to prepare for battle. But if we allow the girl to use her ability on the Hogyoku, our situation becomes significantly worse.
To turn defense into offense, the Captain Commander has dispatched us to carry out this rescue operation.
Yes, and we still have Captain Zaraki and Captain Kochiki with us.
Thinking of the orders she had received, Isane felt reassured.
In her opinion, these 2 captains were unbeatable.
Not ready yet?
Just then, Kenpachi Zaraki strode over with his Zanpakuto resting on his shoulder and the pink-haired Yuichiro perched on his back, muttering impatiently.
How long did it take the last time we entered Hueco Mundo? I don't remember. But it doesn't matter. Those big hollows should be fun to cut down.
I heard they've gotten stronger, that's great, I can't wait.
Kenpachi was eager to go to Hueco Mundo and fight.
His blade was already thirsting for battle. Although Byakuya Kochiki, who walked quietly beside him, didn't say a word, his expression spoke volumes. Aizen had not only framed Rukia but also slaughtered Central 46, which the nobles were duty-bound to protect, and even planned to attack the Soul King Palace.
For justice and honor, he would never let the Espada or Aizen escape punishment. It's ready now.
Mayuri clapped his hands and announced. I've opened 4 stable Garganta and created 4 passages.
Each of our captains will take 1 path. This will be safer.
He was also growing impatient. Kenpachi was in a hurry to kill and collect specimens. Mayuri had worked with Uehara Shiroa before and knew there were many precious resources in Hueco Mundo. This time, he was determined to gather enough material. So, except for Byakuya, the other 3 captains took their lieutenants into the dark passages and headed for Hueco Mundo. Just as the Shinigami captains were en route to Hueco Mundo, Ichigo, Yuria, and Rukia were already locked in desperate battles.
The three were struggling to hold on. Especially Rukia and Yuria, their lives were in serious danger. If it weren't for the Septima Espada Zamari and the Octava Espada Sailaporo having their own ulterior motives, the two would have been defeated long ago. Zamari was thinking of using Rukia as a hostage to threaten the other invaders. Sailaporo simply wasn't interested in fighting seriously.
For him, combat was merely a dessert after the main course of scientific research. Especially after being taught a harsh lesson by Uehara Shiroa, he had become more cautious. Fighting was not his primary goal. After all, no matter how strong one's combat abilities were, they meant nothing when facing someone with mastery over time and space.
Hollows had their limits. Ordinary means couldn't defeat Uehara Shiroa, only technology might stand a chance. Although the two Espada weren't using their full strength, Yuria and Rukia were near collapse. Their lives hung by a thread. Meanwhile, the battle between Ichigo and Grimmjow in his Resurrection form had concluded. Both were seriously injured. In the end, Ichigo emerged victorious, and Grimmjow lost, albeit regretfully. In truth, Grimmjow had the advantage initially. However, at the critical moment, Orihime bravely spoke what was truly in her heart. Even if he failed, even if he fled, even if he used the power of his hollow, as long as Ichigo survived, that would be enough. She couldn't bear to see him continue to suffer. Combined with his previous revelations, Ichigo finally understood. He began to truly accept his own power. Uehara Shiroa's earlier words and actions had made an impact. Ichigo had opened his mind earlier than in the original timeline. Even when his mask broke, it didn't stop him from tapping into his hollow powers. Though he remained cautious and could still hear that irritating voice in his mind, his heart was steadfast as he faced his true self. He had grown. Uehara Shiroa's previous words had pointed out Ichigo's fundamental problem. Compared to protagonists with grand ambitions and lofty ideals, Ichigo was just an ordinary person. This was true both in mentality and character. The poor boy simply wanted to study hard, have a wife and children. He didn't want to be a village chief or save the world or anything so grandiose. A happy family reunion was Ichigo Kurosaki's greatest desire. Very simple and down-to-earth. However, there is always a gap between ideals and reality. The reality was that he was not ordinary, and his family was not safe. Before, he had been evasive because of fear and uncertainty. But now, he wasn't going to run away, because there was nowhere to escape to. Chapter 164. The inner awakening made Ichigo's wavering Ryatsu temporarily stable. He defeated Grimmjow, who had activated his ultimate technique. However, Grimmjow was very unwilling to accept his defeat. Even though he was forced to exit his Resurrection state due to his serious injuries, he still struggled to fight. Ichigo looked at Grimmjow, who could barely walk, and said seriously, "I know you want to be the king. But being a lonely king isn't fun at all." He felt the same way. He didn't want to dominate anyone. This wasn't what he pursued. However, the power within his body didn't seem to agree. Whenever he used the power of the hollow, Ichigo could feel the urge in his heart. It was an instinctive desire, a desire to fight, to kill, to destroy. Grimmjow and the other Arrancar were like a mirror, reflecting this desire and the tragedy of obeying instinct. Although these Arrancar were all-powerful Espada, they weren't happy and lived empty lives. Ichigo sensed this through their Ryatsu. So no matter what, he didn't want to become a monster dominated by instinct. Grimmjow didn't care about that and continued to weakly punch Ichigo's chest with what little strength he had left. Just as the two were at a standstill, Neutra, with his side-like weapon resembling a Grim Reaper, appeared. Without saying a word, he first knocked Grimmjow down with his weapon, then attacked the seriously injured Ichigo. Grimmjow, who was already at death's door, fell to the ground silently and lost consciousness. When he spotted Orihime nearby, Neutra shouted, "Tesla! Grab her! This Ulquiorra is so arrogant, but it's all for nothing. He can't even keep an eye on one woman, what a waste. At the critical moment, I have to take action myself." The Quinto Espada's Fraction, Tesla, like Neutra, wore an eye patch. Two one-eyed warriors, one wearing a white eye patch and the other wearing a black one. One on the left and one on the right, perfectly symmetrical.
Those who didn't know better might think they were a matching pair.
After receiving the order, Tesla didn't hesitate. He immediately activated his ability to restrain Oraheim and threatened. "Don't move."
Although your Shun Shun Rika has strong defensive capabilities, its physical form is very fragile. At this distance, I can break your hairpins before you activate your power. By Lord Aizen's orders, as long as you don't resist, you'll be fine.
"Who are you? Let her go. Come at me if you dare." Seeing Oraheim being held at weapon point by the enemy, Ichigo grew anxious. Neutra sneered. "You talk as if you could beat me if she were released. You're about to die, so what's your name?" "Ichigo Kurosaki." He clenched Zangetsu tightly.
His Ryatsu and physical strength were greatly depleted, and he was seriously injured.
Moreover, the errand car before him exuded immense pressure.
The situation was extremely unfavorable. However, no matter how powerful the enemy, it couldn't stop him from trying to rescue his friend.
Neutra laughed wildly. "You're quite strong.
But unfortunately, I watched your fight just now. I already know your fighting style and all your weaknesses.
So I'll only remember your name for a short time.
Because the dead have no names." At this point, he stuck out his tongue to reveal the number 5 tattooed on it and said confidently. "Look closely, the opponent you fought with all your might until you were covered in wounds is just number 6. And I am number 5 among the Espada.
I am much stronger than him.
So, you will never defeat me.
You're dead."
After saying that, Neutra pursued Ichigo, who was in extremely poor condition, without giving him a chance to breathe.
He was different from Grimmjow. He liked fighting, but he liked winning even more. To ensure victory, he would do whatever it took and would never pursue fair combat like Grimmjow.
In his opinion, taking an enemy's head was victory, plain and simple. So, facing the injured Ichigo and Grimmjow, he chose to attack ruthlessly without hesitation. After a few exchanges, Ichigo was already overwhelmed and could be seriously injured or even killed at any moment.
Oraheim watched anxiously from the sidelines.
But now she was restrained by Tesla, her Shun Shun Rika completely unusable, so she could only worry helplessly. Ichigo roared in frustration, but his anger couldn't change the situation.
In his mind, White continued to laugh. "You're really useless. You tried your best to suppress me and prove yourself. And this is the result? Give up, let me take control.
If you continue like this, you'll die, that girl will die, and all your friends will die."
To be honest, White didn't want to frighten Ichigo.
It was just that this kid was too stubborn. White kept insisting that he was Zangetsu and wanted Ichigo to recognize him. But in return, he got nothing but suspicion and suppression. "I wanted to turn my heart toward the bright moon, but the bright moon shines only on the ditch." White had wanted to get along with Ichigo as a Zanpakuto and guardian, but what he got in return was doubt and restraint. In this case, White would no longer pretend.
He would reveal his true nature. "I am a hollow."
Of course, even so, White still wanted to help Ichigo. But the choice wasn't his to make. After all, he was just a sword.
The only one who could make decisions was the person holding the blade.
All White could do was kill and fight. As before, Ichigo ignored White and chose to continue fighting alone.
However, the opponent's defense was so incredible that even his Tensa Zangetsu and Bankai couldn't break through.
Neutra suppressed him with his seemingly invulnerable body.
"This is what battle truly is," Neutra said disdainfully. "Without strength, no matter how strong your will, it's useless.
Your fighting philosophy is too weak, too naive.
Fighting is for victory, for taking the enemy's life. This is the meaning of our existence.
And in case you didn't know, my Hiero is invincible.
Even if I stood still and let you hit me, you couldn't scratch me."
In his opinion, the battle between Ichigo and Grimmjow was like children playing house, meaningless.
In a real fight, the winner takes the loser's life.
This was the law of nature and the rule of Hueco Mundo, which must be followed.
That fool Neliel had spared him because she was weak. As a result, he had ambushed her, and now she was probably dead in some forgotten corner. What a stupid woman! Such weak, incompetent souls were destined to be eliminated. His fighting philosophy was correct. Facing this overwhelming enemy, Ichigo still gritted his teeth and persisted, without any retreat or fear. At this moment, a casual and indifferent voice rang out. The strongest hierro of the Espada? It seems there's nothing particularly special about it. Hearing this voice, everyone looked up urgently and saw a man coming toward them. At the same time, a little girl peeked out furtively from behind him. She was wearing a green skirt and timidly hugging the white-clad man's leg, looking at everyone with curious eyes. After seeing the newcomer's appearance, Neutra frowned and asked in confusion, "Who are you?" The battle with Ichigo had barely been a warm-up for him, so his senses remained alert to potential threats. His perceptive instincts had been monitoring for external dangers. Yet the man before him had appeared silently, from beginning to end. Neutra hadn't detected his approach. The key concern was that, in his perception, this person didn't emit any ryatsu whatsoever. The stranger wasn't wearing a shihakusho, and there was no mask or hollow hole visible on his body. He didn't look like an Arrancar or a Shinigami. There was something inexplicably strange about his demeanor and presence. An enemy? Tesla also reacted and asked Oraheim, "Is this your ally?" There's no record of this person in our data. However, it doesn't matter who he is. Master Neutra is invincible. Captain Commander Uehara. Ichigo and Oraheim exclaimed in unison. The newcomers were Uehara Shiroha and Nell. Because his shadow clone technique had surpassed the perfect level, Uehara Shiroha had decided to celebrate a little and demonstrate true power to these Arrancar, letting them witness what real strength looked like. He became the center of attention the moment he appeared. His transcendent presence was so eye-catching that everyone ignored Nell, who was full of curiosity beside him. Hearing Ichigo and Oraheim's exclamations, Neutra was shocked. Uehara Shiroha? It's him! He clenched his Zanpakuto tightly, but immediately broke into wild laughter. "Ha, I didn't expect you to come to Hueco Mundo. That's perfect. Your head, along with the Shinigamis, will be enough to prove I am the strongest of the Espada. Use your lives to fulfill my reputation as the mightiest warrior." It was fortunate timing for him. He had felt that a seriously injured and dying Ichigo wasn't enough of a challenge. He had heard of Uehara Shiroha's reputation. If he could kill this man, he would undoubtedly be recognized as the strongest Espada. Tesla looked at Uehara Shiroha with doubt. Is this the legendary White Devil? Why can't I sense any ryatsu or killing intent? Yet there's a strange oppressive force. What a peculiar individual. Although Lord Neutra's strength is impeccable, we can't afford to be careless. He prepared himself to assist Neutra at the first opportunity and quickly deal with Uehara Shiroha. Even if he were to be reprimanded and punished by Neutra afterward, he wouldn't hesitate. After all, the opponent was the infamous Uehara Shiroha of Hueco Mundo. They couldn't take unnecessary risks. For Tesla, protecting Neutra was his only mission. Uehara Shiroha didn't take Neutra or Tesla seriously. To him, a provocation from the Quinto Espada carried no weight at all. The Arrancar wasn't even qualified to warrant his concern. He merely glanced at the thoroughly embarrassed Ichigo, nodded, and said, "You finally look like who you truly are. Although you realized it a bit late, it's better than never." Compared to natural-born warriors, Ichigo was similar to Sawada Tsunoyoshi from Reborn. The most approachable type. Both were born with unparalleled talents, but their personalities and mindsets were more ordinary than most people's. Such personalities had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that neither would ever become tyrants, which was reassuring. The disadvantage was that they would struggle to achieve greatness. Lack of motivation was their biggest problem. Therefore, both were forced to move forward, forced to fight, and forced to become stronger. Heroes are made by the times, this saying described them perfectly. Of course, Uehara Shiroha didn't care whether they were passive or active, willing or unwilling. He only knew that both were excellent tools. Otherwise, a group of crafty veterans wouldn't have repeatedly used Ichigo to work for free. It was for this reason that Uehara Shiroa had offered kind persuasion to Ichigo. As for these noisy Arrancar and Hueco Mundo, they were naturally marked for death. Ichigo didn't know how to respond to Uehara Shiroa's praise. It must be a good thing to be acknowledged by someone of his stature, but too many things had happened recently, and his reactions were sluggish. Moreover, the captain commander was too mysterious. Ichigo couldn't grasp his thoughts. Looking at Uehara Shiroa, who was acting as if no one else mattered and clearly didn't take him seriously, Noitra's expression turned cold as he smiled maliciously. "You're completely underestimating me. Uehara Shiroa, I've heard your name. I don't know if you're truly as powerful as they say, but you are indeed our enemy. And enemies should be eliminated." He knew the man before him was definitely powerful. The moniker White Devil had come from countless slain greater hollows, representing mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Even though Noitra believed himself invincible, he didn't act rashly. This was typical of him, otherwise, he wouldn't have waited for Ichigo and Grimmjow to finish their battle before stepping in to take advantage. Of course, there was a more important factor that he was unwilling to admit. He sensed an inexplicable pressure emanating from Uehara Shiroa, which made him uneasy. It felt like walking in darkness toward an unseen cliff. One step forward would mean being shattered to pieces. This was how Noitra felt now. He was furious at his own sense of incompetence. For someone like him, fear in the heart equaled failure and death. He should make others feel fear and uneasiness, not experience those emotions himself. Therefore, Noitra refused to acknowledge the fear in his heart. Meanwhile, Tesla addressed Uehara Shiroa, "You're here to save Oraheim, aren't you? But now she's in our custody, what do you intend to do?" Strictly speaking, his actions violated Aizen's orders. After all, Aizen had commanded that unless Oraheim betrayed them, she was not to be harmed, especially the physical carriers of her Shun Shun Rika. However, Tesla was truly loyal only to Noitra. This was why he had previously blocked Chad's full-force counterattack for his master. Even now, while sensing the strange oppressive force from Uehara Shiroa, he wanted to test the newcomer's resolve. He knew that both Aizen and Noitra would disapprove of his actions. But he did it anyway. This was loyalty. Seeing his subordinate acting independently again, Noitra glared fiercely at Tesla. "Tesla, what are you implying? Do you think I will lose?" He wouldn't mind using hostages to threaten Uehara Shiroa. But Tesla, speaking for him, suggested that he feared the White Devil. Even if the opponent was infamous, even if there was something unsettling about him, Noitra refused to believe he could lose. "You don't seriously think you can threaten me this way, do you?" Uehara Shiroa said with a bored expression. "I don't even care about the fate of Soul Society, let alone a mere human and a substitute Shinigami. What exactly are you thinking?" Chapter 165. "Ah, this is really ridiculous." Noitra laughed wildly and asked, "Then why are you here?" "To destroy you." "What does it have to do with why?" Uehara Shiroa said calmly. "Do you need a reason to crush an ant? Don't keep asking me to answer such boring questions. Your life isn't worth wasting my time on, not even a second." "You?" Noitra wanted to refute, but for some reason, he couldn't speak. He could see that this guy didn't regard them as beings worthy of consideration, not even as ants. This Shinigami was simply heartless, even more of a monster than they were. For a moment, Noitra was just like those defeated players who hadn't yet accepted their loss. He was inferior in every way, losing in presence and in battle, losing spectacularly. "Captain Commander Uehara, please take Oraheim out of Hueco Mundo first," Ichigo pleaded. "Her ability is crucial and could awaken the Hogyoku prematurely. No matter what, she must not fall into Aizen's hands. When my injuries heal, I will defeat Aizen myself." During his previous conversations with Grimmjow and Oraheim, he had learned why Aizen had lured Oraheim to Hueco Mundo. In his mind, without the Hogyoku, there would be no Oken, no danger, and Karakura town would be safe. For this, Ichigo was willing to sacrifice everything. For his family and friends, he would fight to the end. Uehara Shiroa sighed, "How can you be so naive? You believe everything others tell you. If someone asks you to go to Soul Society, you go there. If someone tells you to become a hollow, you become a hollow. If someone invites you to Hueco Mundo, you come running. You've met Aizen before, so why do you still believe what he says? Haven't you been deceived enough? Do you really think the Hogyoku can't be used without Oraheim's power? You underestimate Aizen far too much. Uehara Shiroha knew that Aizen never told the complete truth. Or rather, he told partial truths that could still deceive you. The highest level of deception was to lie to people with fragments of truth. For example, Aizen claimed that Oraheim's rejection of fate could awaken the Hogyoku prematurely. This was true. If Oraheim were willing, she could use her Shun Shun Rika to fully awaken the Hogyoku.
Hearing this, everyone would naturally assume that Aizen brought Oraheim to Hueco Mundo to use her ability. If you believe this, you'd fall into his trap. Because this was only part of his plan, and not even the main objective. In fact, Aizen's purpose in luring Oraheim to Hueco Mundo was twofold: first, to force Ichigo to fight desperately and stimulate his potential; second, to draw Kenpachi Zaraki and other captains away from Soul Society. This would divide the battlefield to the greatest extent, preventing him from facing the full strength of the Gotei 13 while simultaneously eliminating troublesome variables. Of course, it would be even better if he could lure Uehara Shiroha himself to Hueco Mundo. After all, while Kenpachi was just a potential threat, Uehara Shiroha had been secretly applying pressure on Aizen. To draw him away, Aizen had likely prepared numerous contingency plans. However, Uehara never played by the rules. Without waiting for Aizen to implement his schemes, he had taken the initiative to come to Hueco Mundo himself. What he said is true. Neutra looked at Oraheim with malicious eyes. Although she's just a human female, her ability is truly remarkable. That power is effective even on the Hogyoku. That's why we call her the Princess of Rejection. He didn't believe that Uehara Shiroha didn't care about the Hogyoku. No one could resist the temptation of such a treasure, as it could effectively enhance one's strength. Uehara Shiroha looked at Neutra and said, "This is why you're pitiful. Your understanding of the world, power, and wisdom is woefully inadequate." These fools had probably racked their brains yet never realized that Aizen's real target wasn't Oraheim, but Ichigo himself. If Aizen wanted to evolve perfectly, he needed a complete Hogyoku and the power of hollowification. Beyond Oraheim, Aizen had other methods to awaken the Hogyoku prematurely. But the perfect power of hollowification was possessed only by Ichigo, the unexpected Soul King candidate. The Soul King candidate bloodline within Ichigo was itself the most precious resource. To some extent, it was even more valuable than the Hogyoku. After all, bloodline expanded one's upper limits, while the Hogyoku merely helped reach those limits faster. It couldn't exceed inherent boundaries. The Visored and Arankar only used hollowification to break their existing limitations. The Hogyoku simply ensured the stable progression of hollowification. Therefore, Aizen had thoughtfully arranged a series of bosses for Ichigo to face, maximizing the potential of his power. To prevent Ichigo from being in real danger, Aizen had even used the Hogyoku to strengthen Oraheim's abilities. That's why, after coming to Hueco Mundo, her Shun Shun Rika had become stronger. So far, everything had unfolded according to that manipulative schemer's calculations. Once again, everyone was being played by Aizen. You said I was pitiful? Neutra could no longer suppress the murderous intent in his heart. He raised his crescent-shaped weapon and swung it toward Uehara Shiroha. Facing the massive blade, Uehara Shiroha didn't move. Seeing his apparent defenselessness, Tesla prepared to turn around and launch a sneak attack. Ignorance breeds fearlessness. Uehara Shiroha shook his head, shifted his body, and disappeared. When he reappeared, he had escaped the range of the massive weapon. At the same time, a branch had materialized in his hand. The white branch was nothing special, just an ordinary quartz twig from the Hueco Mundo desert. Neutra swung his blade through empty air, looked at the dodging Uehara Shiroha, and taunted, "After all that big talk, it turns out you can only dodge. And what's that in your hand? Are you trying to make me laugh with your parlor tricks?" Inwardly, he was actually a bit shocked. He hadn't clearly seen how Uehara Shiroha had evaded his attack. This meant the Shinigami was significantly faster than him.
But since Uehara had chosen to dodge rather than block, it suggested he feared Neutra's attack.
And even now, Neutra still couldn't sense any powerful Ryatsu from him. He convinced himself he could win this battle.
Uehara Shiroa waved the branch and said calmly, "This is a divine sword. A divine sword that can destroy your Hierro."
Hearing this claim, Ichigo, Orihime, and Neutra were all surprised and skeptical.
A divine sword? How could that be possible?
It was just an ordinary branch, broken off from a nearby quartz tree.
Ichigo and Orihime couldn't understand why Uehara Shiroa would call the branch a divine sword.
The two honest souls thought that perhaps they simply lacked experience.
Maybe this branch from Hueco Mundo really was something extraordinary. Neutra was not so generous in his assessment. How could he, a great hollow of Hueco Mundo, not know what these branches were? This Uehara Shiroa was just being mysterious. Maybe this guy was actually nothing special.
Under the dome of Las Noches, Neutra, holding his massive crescent blade, laughed wildly.
"Tesla, did you hear that? This guy actually claimed a mere branch as a divine sword. How hilarious! Trying to trick me with such an obvious deception. Who does he think I am? Tesla, why aren't you laughing?"
He frowned and looked at Tesla, who remained motionless, confusion spreading across his face.
What is this guy doing?
Just a moment ago, he seemed about to launch a sneak attack on Uehara Shiroa.
Why did he suddenly stop moving? Is he scared? What a useless subordinate. Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your fraction. He's just dead. Uehara Shiroa's expression became even more casual and indifferent. Didn't you say that the dead have no names? Well, the dead also don't laugh.
The emotions of the dead are always very stable. What arrogance to challenge someone of his level.
It's really no pity to die. Then, under the shocked gazes of the three onlookers, Tesla's head separated from his body. The subordinate who had just threatened Uehara Shiroa moments before died silently. The death was sudden, straightforward, and absolute.
Looking at the head on the ground, Orihime's eyes widened like saucers, her legs weakened, and her body froze in place.
Ichigo also stared in disbelief, wondering, what just happened? Was it really the branch?
Thinking back, he seemed to have vaguely glimpsed a figure flashing in front of Tesla.
But he couldn't be certain. Moreover, even if Uehara Shiroa's speed was truly that fast, how had he cut off Tesla's head?
The body of an Arrancar was extremely durable, protected by Hierro.
Could Uehara Shiroa really have severed Tesla's head with just a branch? How was that possible? Witnessing Tesla's peaceful passing, Neutra was immediately shaken. What did you do? Tesla's death was so sudden that Neutra felt overwhelmed.
He could accept death, it was a natural part of battle. But he couldn't accept it when it came so suddenly, so casually, so effortlessly, and so strangely.
Uehara Shiroa waved the branch in his hand. Nothing special.
I just used this divine sword to sever his head.
Isn't it natural for an ant to end up this way after challenging a dragon? Do you have any objections?
He was somewhat disappointed with these Arrancar. In truth, Arrancar strengthened by the Hogyoku had great potential and remarkable abilities. However, each one possessed psychological flaws, just like Ichigo, who had not fully embraced his hollow nature. So while these Arrancar appeared fierce and murderous, they all lacked a certain resolve in actual combat. This crucial missing element ensured they would fail at critical moments. This weakness had laid the groundwork for the eventual downfall of the Espada. Aizen had not yet recognized this problem, let alone solved it. Of course, Aizen was too indifferent to bother addressing such issues. For the master of Las Noches, if tools proved inconvenient, he simply replaced them. There was no need for repairs. After all, Hueco Mundo was vast. If one died, another could easily take its place. Aizen never anticipated that at the crucial moment, the Espada would collectively fail and prove almost worthless.
How is this possible? Neutra looked at Uehara Shiroa in shock.
He had thought his attack had been effective and the opponent had been forced to dodge. If that were the case, such speed would be understandable. But if events truly unfolded as Uehara Shiroa claimed, if he had instantly killed Tesla with a mere branch, the implications were entirely different. Not only had the Shinigami's speed reached an incredible level, but he had also somehow penetrated Tesla's Hierro silently with a simple twig. Such a feat was absolutely impossible. The attack made no sense whatsoever. Neutra couldn't comprehend or accept such an assault. It must have been the power of a Zanpakuto. Nothing is impossible. Uehara Shiroa pointed the branch at Neutra. You're next, Neutra. I will use this divine sword to defeat your so-called strongest Hierro. The strongest Hierro, the strongest of the Espada, this Neutra truly has no humility whatsoever. Hearing Uehara Shiroa's declaration, Neutra was enraged. He roared, activated his weapon, and swung it in a vicious attack. But in the next second, he lost sight of Uehara Shiroa. Neither combat intuition, danger perception, nor sensory detection aided him. There was no chill down his spine, no hair standing on end, no overwhelming reiatsu, just silence as Uehara Shiroa appeared behind him. Under the cold moonlight, Uehara Shiroa landed gracefully, his appearance immaculate, and casually remarked, I controlled my strength. It seems the so-called strongest Hierro amounts to just this. The Quinto Espada was indeed just that, the fifth ranked. Even when Uehara restrained his power, Neutra remained vulnerable. For one who had achieved unity with his sword, any defense was futile. The power of his strikes could cut through space and time itself. Mere Hierro was like tofu before his blade. At this moment, Neutra finally reacted. He groaned, widened his eyes, and looked at his left shoulder. The place where his arm had been connected was now empty. At some point, his limb had been severed and now lay on the sand. A buzzing filled his ears as his mind went blank. Uehara Shiroa had actually cut off his arm with just a branch. The Hierro he had been so proud of had proven completely ineffective. Now he understood that Tesla's death had not been without cause. However, even now, Neutra could not comprehend how Uehara Shiroa had accomplished this feat. Even for a Zanpakuto ability, it shouldn't be so overwhelmingly powerful. He hadn't felt a thing before his arm was severed by a branch, a mere branch. And the information he had was wrong. Wasn't this guy an ice wielder? Rumors said that Uehara's Zanpakuto could create ice and snow, which had earned him the title of White Devil. No matter how he looked at it, this ability had nothing to do with cutting. Why was his slash so devastating? Meanwhile, Orihime had darted to Ichigo's side like a frightened deer. After witnessing these events, she shrank back even further. Although Captain Commander Uehara was an ally, powerful and reliable, the scene before them was terrifyingly cruel. Unlike Aizen, whose immense reiatsu was overwhelming, Uehara Shiroa's spiritual pressure was almost imperceptible. The incredibly powerful Shinigami before them was like a black hole, unfathomable, like a god. So fast. Ichigo stared straight ahead, marveling inwardly. I couldn't even see his movements clearly. Captain Commander Uehara is incredibly strong. And that slash. In his Bankai with Hollow Mask, Ichigo's movement speed and reaction time were extremely quick, and his cutting power was terrifyingly strong. After all, Tensa Zangetsu itself was a Bankai that excelled in both strength and speed. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.